Whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you telling me there's more than one type of polygamy denier? Yes. It's interesting when you do a series like this, right? Because from my perspective, I'm building a sort of library for people to turn to for years into the future. But if you jump right into one episode and catch a single soundbite, you may not know what I think completely on a topic. So, anyways, we actually started out this whole series looking at the history of polygamy skepticism. We had Mark Tinsmeyer on talking about it. I've done it a few other times. So, obviously, there's more than one type of polygamy denier. There are also a lot of rhetorical games where individuals are pretending there are greater differences between different polygamy deniers than there actually are. We need to pay attention to that and figure out just what we're dealing with when we talk about these communities and see just how people are lined up. So when the first videos came out of this series, so many polygamy skeptics were upset that I spoke about Justin Griffin in the same conversation as I spoke about Jeremy Hoop. And of course, this proved really ironic to me because when I finally finished that initial series, Jeremy Hoops, who was upset that I linked him with Justin Griffin, said, "Hey, let's hang out, me, you, and Justin." I thought, say what? The guy you don't want people to see an association with, you want the three of us to chill? I mean, that sounds fun. They seem like good guys, minus this topic. But anyways, we should know what rhetorical games and what actual communities we have going on among polygamy skeptics. Today, I want to talk about one of the most interesting polygamy skeptic communities, and that is the Church of Jesus Christ Cutlerite. I love Cutlerites. I think they are so fascinating. I love them because they are completely loyal to the Nauvoo tradition of Latter-day Saints. This comes from my research in an article published in Dialogue. It's called The Highest Class of Adulterers and Whoremongers, Plural Marriage, the Church of Jesus Christ Cutlerite, and the Construction of Memory. I don't know if I've talked to you guys about this before. This is one of my earliest articles. When I first applied to Brigham Young University to teach in the religion department, I got a phone call. It said, "Hey, we're really interested in you. Can you do us a favor and not name your articles interesting things like the highest class of adulterers and whoremongers?" It's a quote, of course. So Cutlerites are founded by Alpheus Cutler, who reorganized the church, and that's his language, in 1853. Alpheus Cutler was a faithful saint. He did many important things in the 1830s and early 1840s. He was a member of the High Council at Joseph's death, and he was one of those chosen to be part of the Council of 50. In fact, Alpheus Cutler was among a rare group of Latter-day Saints to receive their second anointings during the lifetime of the prophet Joseph Smith. Wow. So this is insider status. It's a big deal. In the Nauvoo temple, after the martyrdom, Alpheus Cutler is going to be sealed to 5 women, including his first wife. I'm actually going to read part of this article to you. It says, "Before we can use the Cutlerites as a case study in memory construction, we should look at the historical moment to which the new institution was reacting." That is, Cutlerites were formed as a reaction to the church and Brigham Young's continuation of the church. The first subject we need to probe is to what extent the available records suggest Cutlerites were involved in plural marriage. Should scholars speak of the proto-Cutlerite period, that is the period between Joseph Smith's death and the organization of their Church of Jesus Christ in 1853, should we talk about that as a polygamous phase in the sect's history? What knowledge did individual Cutlerites have about plural marriage in their own sect or among the followers of Brigham Young prior to Orson Pratt's 1852 announcement? That is, Alpheus Cutler was sealed to 5 women. Did they even know that? When exactly Alpheus Cutler was introduced to plural marriage as sponsored by Joseph Smith or other ecclesiastical leaders is uncertain. However, his membership in the Holy Order and Nauvoo's High Council would have positioned him with plenty of opportunities to learn of the practice. For example, Cutler may have been in attendance when Hiram Smith read the July 12, 1843 revelation before the Nauvoo High Council on August 12, 1843. Unfortunately, there was no attendance taken during the historic meeting, and Cutler was absent the following week. Because the Holy Order was populated with many of those who were involved in early plural marriage, Cutler would have also been able to discover the practice through these associations. That he remained unaware of polygamy until after Joseph Smith's death seems highly unlikely. I actually had the perspective that maybe it was possible, right? That maybe in the Holy Order, perhaps once Emma Smith is participating, Joseph wants to keep plural marriage out of it. Danny Jorgensen, who's a Cutlerite scholar, a scholar of the Cutlerites, really disagreed with that. I don't know what the answer is. I don't actually think, other than some hints at plural marriage in the Holy Order, I'm not sure that they all were talking about it openly. Obviously, there was no plural sealings in these meetings. So it is certain, and if you're a polygamy skeptic, this is what you call sometimes the quorum of the secret priesthood. When I call it Holy Order, other people are calling this anointed quorum. I think Joseph Smith Papers actually decided to call it just the quorum. It is certain that by 1845, Cutler had become fully immersed in the world of post-martyrdom plural marriage. But remember, that's a year after Joseph's death. His 20-year-old daughter, Clarissa Cressy Cutler, married the apostle Heber C. Kimball on February 29, 1845. Cutler's 17-year-old daughter, Emily, also married Kimball, but not until December 1845. On August 9, 1845, Kimball in turn performed the ceremony that sealed Cutler to his first plural wife, the recently divorced ex-wife of Orrin Porter Rockwell, Luana Hartbeeb. On January 14, 1846, following a general policy for those couples that had previously been sealed outside of the temple, Alpheus had his sealing to Luana, as well as his earlier sealing to Lois, performed again within the temple. The same procedure was followed with the reperformance of Cutler's higher anointings. I'm trying to avoid saying second anointing, but I feel like we can say that. So the reperformance of his second anointing, although this time with both Lois and Luana accompanying him in the rite. On February 3, 1846, Cutler was sealed to 5 additional women: Margaret Carr, Abigail Carr, Sally Cox, Dizzy, Caroline McCall, and Henrietta Clorinda Miller. Cutler's new wives received their anointings on the same day. Of these 7 women, we only have a record of 3 accompanying him during the Native American mission. That is just a few years later. This is pretty common when people are getting sealed really quickly in Nauvoo, such as Heber C. Kimball, as we'll talk about in an upcoming episode. It's very common for these marriages to last just a brief moment. So we can only chart 3 of his wives in the coming years. Alpheus Cutler had children with only one of his plural wives, Luana. Danny Jorgensen's research has uncovered 3 children born to the union between 1846 and 1851. In order to conceal their paternity, the 2 children to survive childhood did not use the last name Cutler. Jacob Lorenzo, a son born in 1846, was given Cutler's mother's maiden name, Boyd, and Olive Luana, a daughter born in 1850, used the surnames of Luana's 2 later husbands alternately. Alpheus Cutler, his wives, and his daughters appear to have been the only actual participants in plural marriage from the group of individuals in Silver Creek, that is, this early Proto-Cutlerite community. However, during the Proto-Cutlerite period, there was one other polygamous family connected to the community: F. Walter Cox, one of Cutler's counselors, and his 3 wives. Luman H. Calkins, Cutler's other counselor and the bishop of the Silver Creek branch, though not technically a polygamist, was also sealed to multiple women in the Nauvoo temple, as he was sealed to both his current and his deceased wife. Yet, as Jorgensen's research has demonstrated, this was far from the extent of the colony's polygamous ties. Many of those who would become Cutlerites participated in the Nauvoo temple experience and began the trek westward to winter quarters, where polygamy was becoming an increasingly public affair. Although Jorgensen may have overstated the situation when he wrote that early Cutlerites possessed, quote, an intimate, detailed, directly experiential knowledge of plural marriage, their associations make it unlikely that many of Cutler's followers needed Cutler to introduce them to plural marriage, as they would have already learned of the practice either by rumor or by personal experience with the rest of the Brighamites. All right. So, Alpheus Cutler, 2 of his daughters are sealed to Heber C. Kimball. Just of interest, these are 2 women that William Clayton hoped he could be sealed to, had a dream about them, and Heber C. Kimball had already married them, or would soon marry them. One of the reasons, if you're questioning William Clayton's journal, is embarrassing situations like this one are all over the place. If you were making a forgery, you'd have to be quite the martyr to portray yourself like Clayton portrays his own blunders in his journal. All right, so plural marriage stops. So this is Sylvester J. Whiting, who would be about a half century removed from the actual events, 50 years later, is writing about the organization of the Cutlerite Church, and he includes this comment. After Father Cutler reorganized the church in 1853, he, by the authority of the holy priesthood, vetoed polygamy till the coming of Christ. Anyone who says Father Cutler ever sanctioned, upheld, or practiced polygamy are ignorant, unlearned, dishonest, or deceived, for they took false reports for facts, not knowing the truth. So the end of that sentence seems really bold. Never polygamous practice by Alpheus Cutler or anyone else. But the beginning acknowledges that there's actually a vetoing. Like, let's put this on hold until Christ returns. Lyman White says something similar. We're putting this on hold suspended until the second coming. Ultimately, only 2 of the women he's sealed to in the temple make it to their final destination in Iowa, where the church is organized. And at that time, before then, Luana Hart Beebe, who was his wife, was remarried to another man. So here's Orrin Porter Rockwell's wife. And remember, this is the one that Danny Jorgensen tells us there were children with. Iva Gold, a Cutlerite descendant who belonged to the RLDS faith, recorded her experience of probing her parents and grandparents for information concerning polygamy. She had heard there's something going on there and you guys are trying not to talk about it. What is it? And so she wrote this in an undated letter sometime in the 20th century. I asked my folks some of the questions about the Cutlerites that you asked yesterday. They said it was common belief in the early days that Alpheus Cutler had been a polygamist, though the present generation of Cutlerites deny it. My father said that at one time on a short journey he stopped at the home of Mrs. Luana Beebe Boyd, who told him she was one of the wives of Alpheus Cutler, that she had been a poor girl without relatives to care for her, and Cutler told her if she would be sealed to him, he would support her. So it sounds like an economic arrangement. On reaching home, my father asked my grandfather, Francis L. Whiting, a brother of Chauncey Whiting, who was the successor of Alpheus Cutler, if it was true that Father Cutler had more than one wife. He answered reluctantly, I suppose it is true that he had 3 wives. And when I asked if Mrs. Boyd was one of them, he said, yes, I suppose she was. He was a staunch Cutlerite and did not like to admit it, but was too honest to deny it. My grandmother then said that Father Cutler got rid of his wives before he started the church, that he took one of them on a mission to the Indians and she died there. Another he gave away to a man who wanted to marry her. And of course, that is Luana Hart Beebe. The other passed away. Actually, both of Alpheus Cutler's daughters who were sealed to Heber C. Kimball. There's great stories there, which we could talk about at some point. I doubt I do it in this podcast, but I might tell some of that story in the second episode of Angels and Seer Stones about martyrdom canes. Very interesting, this family. All right. So in this article, I talk about the theory about how it ended, but the thing that's really interesting to me is how do people lose knowledge of polygamy? So plural marriage is practiced. Alpheus Cutler marries 5 additional plural wives. He's sealed to 6 total women in the Nauvoo temple. Realistically, only 3 of them seem like they're marriages that are going to endure beyond this sort of religious ceremony that we can show at least. And there are 2 children, or 3 children, born to Luana Hart Beebe, only one that has genetic descendants of Alpheus Cutler. And he gives these children, he suggests that she should remarry. She remarries, which is an interesting that thing occurs. Luana Hart Beebe has rumors told about her. People think maybe she's a witch. And so Cutlerites are very uncomfortable about this former plural wife that's living in their midst. So it becomes absolutely forbidden to speak about plural marriage within the Cutlerite community. On one incident, this Bishop Calkins, who was a leader in the church, will talk about plurality, plural marriage, and he wants to speak about it in some church meetings, and it creates a whole scandal where he's ultimately silenced and told he can't discuss the topic. So in the next generation, they start focusing on Brighamites and saying these are wicked guys and don't become like them. What's so interesting, though, is that they're also dealing with the RLDS. I think it's so interesting to chart Cutlerite relationships with the RLDS. Remember, RLDS are also polygamy skeptics, but the major thing they differentiate with one another about is, well, I suppose a couple things. One, Cutlerites are gathered. Two, they believe in the temple. And three, they teach the law of consecration. The RLDS reject each of those items. During this period in the 1860s to 1880s, Cutlerites are getting proselytized and losing many members to the Josephites, to the RLDS faith. So it's really interesting to see how the two groups respond to one another. I love this quote. An early Church of Jesus Christ leader, Sylvester Whiting, writes to one of his relatives that actually followed Brigham Young to Utah and was still there, noting that when one of the followers of Alpheus Cutler united with the reorganization, when Cutlerite became RLDS, quote, they don't seem to have any of the real old-fashioned Mormonism in them, but they seem like the Methodist. This is a big deal. So Cutlerites are a version of polygamy denier who denies both that Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage and that Alpheus Cutler practiced plural marriage. So what happens when you get rid of history, when you start going down this route? Well, they've certainly held on to the endowment, but the thing that they've lost is the sealing ordinances. Cutlerites have abandoned that idea. When I met the Cutlerite prophet in the early 2000s, he explained to me he had just gone to the Nauvoo temple, and he explained to me that he agreed with all that was done there, the whole endowment. He just had one exception, and it was this idea of sealing. And so for me, the story of the Cutlerites is the story about what happens when you start rejecting truths, in this case, historical truths even. And yeah, your knowledge continues to decline, just like Justin Griffin pointed out is occurring to polygamy skeptics, just as Alma 12 tells us occurred with Zeezrom and those that bought into his nonsense. It's an important thing to understand. Cutlerites are wonderful people. They have a tiny little church. I don't think they're guided by priesthood. I don't think they're guided by revelation. But I think about that commitment to preserving the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, the endowment, the only other church to preserve the endowment from the time of Nauvoo is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Cutlerites. And for that, they deserve our respect. I'll come back soon, and at some point I'll discuss other varieties of polygamy skepticism. Thanks for tuning in.